Ancient Rome, with its vast empire and its legacy in history, is known for its innovations in architecture, law, and organization, but it also has its darker, more surprising, and sometimes terrifying sides. In this video, we explore 35 of the creepy facts and curiosities about the Romans that you probably didn't know. Urine tax. Urine in ancient Rome wasn't just used for medical or hygienic purposes, it became a valuable commodity. Urine was used in various industries, such as leather tanning, clothing bleaching, and cleaning laundry and laundromats. Since urine contains ammonia, it was ideal for removing stains, especially from woolen garments. In this context, Nero introduced a tax on urine known as vectigal urinae, a tribute people had to pay for using public baths. However, this tribute disappeared for a time until it was reinstated by Vespasian. Today, Vespasian is remembered for using the revenue from this tax to fund public works, such as improving the infrastructure of public baths. Phallus veneration. In ancient Rome, the phallus was not just a sexual symbol, but was also linked to good luck and protection. Romans believed that the male energy and fertility represented by the phallus could ward off bad luck and evil influences. This is why they placed phallic amulets at the entrances of homes for protection. Cicero and Seneca, two of the most important Roman philosophers, also believed in the protective powers of these amulets. Even in religious rituals, priestesses of the goddess Vesta used a large phallic amulet as a symbol of well-being as part of the ceremony to protect the Roman state. Lavish dinners. While most Roman citizens led a simple life, based primarily on grains like bread, barley, and some long-lasting proteins like salted fish, wealthy Romans stood out for their extravagant banquets. These banquets were not only meant to feed guests, but also served to impose the social status of the hosts. At these events, the food served was often extravagant, though not necessarily of the best quality, as the primary goal was ostentation. Murals decorated dining rooms, and banquets took place in large halls, some of which were constructed with complex mosaics, with dinners lasting for hours, combining music, performances, and sometimes even slaves serving the most luxurious dishes. Left-handed people were disliked. In ancient Rome, being left-handed was linked to bad luck. Unlike modern societies, where left-handed people have their own rights and adapted tools, Romans viewed left-handed people with suspicion. Even the term sinister, which we now know as something unfortunate, comes from the Latin word for left, sinistra. The bad luck associated with left-handedness was so ingrained that only the right hand was considered the correct one for taking oaths or doing important activities, as in ancient Rome, the right hand was associated with virtue and honor. Cross-dressing. Emperor Caligula. One of the most eccentric emperors in Roman history was Caligula, known for his completely defiant behavior against social and political norms. Not only did he rule with a series of excessive and crazy decisions, but he also made public appearances dressed in women's clothing. It is said that he would abandon the traditional Roman toga to dress as a woman and walk in public wearing silk garments. Additionally, it is said that he named his horse Incitatus as a priest and senator. This action, though ridiculed by many, likely aimed to mock the Roman Senate and demonstrate that he had absolute power to decide on anything, even the most ridiculous. Roman military medicine. The Roman healthcare system, especially in the military sector, was surprisingly advanced for its time. Roman doctors, known for their skill, not only treated the civilian population, but also provided medical care on the battlefield. Military surgeons were highly valued due to their ability to treat wounds and save the lives of legionaries. Roman military medicine was based on a systematic approach, with techniques such as surgery for fractures, arrow removal, and the healing of battle wounds using metal tools and rudimentary sterilization methods. Roman medicine marked a significant difference compared to other medical systems of the time, establishing a solid foundation that would influence medieval European medicine. 7. Gladiator fights were always fatal. Movies show us gladiator battles where death was always guaranteed. However, gladiators were valuable professionals, and their constant death would have been a disaster for the business. Although violence was part of the spectacle, most fights did not end in death. The real struggle was for their survival and fame. Roman statues were white. Although we often see Roman statues made of white marble, in their time, they were not like that. They were decorated with bright colors, gold and silver, with vibrant polychromy that we can hardly imagine today. Over time, these details were erased, but ancient Rome was, in fact, a much more colorful place than we think, and these are just some of the lies about Rome. But before we continue, what has surprised you the most so far? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this fascinating journey through the history of Rome. The fall of the Roman Empire was in 476 AD. Although we all associate the fall of Rome with 476 AD, this is only the fall of the Western Roman Empire. The Eastern Roman Empire, known as the Byzantine Empire, continued to exist until 1453, nearly 1,000 years later. Can you imagine an empire lasting that long? 10. Romans had a high level of hygiene. While Rome is famous for its public baths and its thermal baths, the reality is that most Romans lived in deplorable hygienic conditions. Trash was thrown into the streets, and human waste was also left there, creating an unsanitary environment in the city. Not even baths were a luxury accessible to everyone. Romans wore red tunics. It's a classic image. Roman soldiers dressed in red tunics, soaked in the blood of their enemies. However, the reality is that soldiers did not always wear red. In fact, the most common colors were white or brown, and red was only a symbolic color associated with Mars, the god of war. Red did have a military significance, but it was not exclusive, nor omnipresent in the attire of legionaries. Additionally, the red color on the battlefield was not necessarily to symbolize violence, but for a psychological effect. The presence of a well-organized legion in uniform intimidated its enemies. Most soldiers, however, wore functional and practical clothing that allowed them to move effectively in combat. Romans had high-quality doctors and were always at the forefront of medicine. Although the Romans made some advances in engineering and architecture, their medicine was far behind what we understand today as professionalism. Many Roman doctors were Greek slaves, and their knowledge of anatomy and diseases was rudimentary. Moreover, Roman medicine was plagued by charlatans, selling miraculous remedies with no evidence of their effectiveness. Many sought magical cures or subjected themselves to dangerous practices based more on superstition than science. The reality is that medical conditions were precarious, and most Romans did not have access to qualified doctors, but rather to healers or village doctors. Roman women had a lot of freedom and power. It is true that some women from the Roman nobility, such as Agrippina or Livia, managed to exert significant influence on politics and society. However, this image of emancipation is an exaggeration. The vast majority of Roman women were subjugated to male authorities, fathers, husbands, or guardians. They had no right to vote, nor could they hold public office, and their role was limited to domestic responsibilities or very specific religious functions. Therefore, while some women reached considerable power, most lived within a deeply patriarchal structure. Romans always ate opulently at banquets. Movies show us Roman banquets as parties of excess, with mountains of food and wine flowing freely. While it is true that sometimes banquets were grand occasions, the everyday reality for most Romans was much more austere. In the cities, especially in the lower-class neighborhoods, the food was simple and often lacked variety. The most common foods were bread, vegetables, legumes, olives, and some meat. Only the elites could afford feasts with exotic delicacies, and many of those banquets were exclusive celebrations for the upper society. Londinium, the conquest of Britain. The Romans arrived in Britain in 55 BC under the command of Julius Caesar. Although their initial invasion was unsuccessful, the Romans eventually conquered the entire island and established a Roman colony called Britannia. Londinium, the Roman settlement that would later become London, was founded around 43 AD. The Romans not only brought their army, but also their innovations in architecture, road infrastructure, and urban administration. Although the native Britons fiercely resisted, as shown by Boudicca's rebellion in 60 AD, the Roman presence ultimately shaped the history of Britain until their withdrawal in the 5th century. The Julian calendar. The calendar used by the Romans, before Julius Caesar, was chaotic and unreliable, as it depended on lunar observations and the decisions of the pontiffs, priests in charge of religious dates. It was Julius Caesar, in 46 BC, who decided to implement a calendar reform with the help of the astronomer Sosigenes of Alexandria. The Julian calendar established a year of 365 days, with a leap year every 4 years to adjust for the difference with the solar cycle. This calendar was so efficient that it remained in use for over 1,600 years until it was replaced by the Gregorian calendar in 1582. The Julian calendar laid the foundation for the modern calendar, and its influence persists to this day. The Roman global currency. Rome's monetary system was one of the most advanced of antiquity. At its peak, the Roman denarius was used throughout the empire, from Rome to Britain and the Far East. The Roman monetary system facilitated international trade and allowed the denarius to be accepted as universal currency in the regions under Roman rule. In addition to the denarii, there were other coins such as the as and the sestertius, which were commonly used by citizens. The expansion of Roman currency helped consolidate the economic unification of the Roman Empire. Latin as a global language. Latin, the official language of Rome, left an indelible mark on Western culture. As the Roman Empire expanded, Latin became the official language of the conquered regions and later consolidated itself as the language of Christianity. Many modern languages, such as Spanish, Italian, French, and Portuguese, have direct roots in Latin. Additionally, legal Latin remains the foundation of many current legal terms. Phrases like a priori, de facto, and a posteriori originate from Latin, showing the enduring influence of the Roman language. Roman bureaucracy. To manage their vast empire, the Romans created an impressive bureaucracy, which, although sometimes inefficient, was key to their success in managing territories. The term bureaucracy comes from the Roman system of records and paperwork, where all official documents had to be carefully preserved and archived. The Romans kept detailed records on taxes, lands, people, and transactions. This allowed the Roman Empire to efficiently manage trade, laws, and the recruitment of soldiers despite its enormous size. Heating system, the hypocaust. Although they did not have central heating, the Romans devised an incredibly advanced system called the hypocaust. This heating system consisted of radiant heat generated by burning wood in a furnace or cistern, with the heat distributed beneath houses and buildings elevated on columns or pillars. Ceramic pipes installed in the floors heated the rooms, providing a constant source of warmth. Public baths, known as thermae, also used this system to heat the water and facilities. Roman law. The Roman legal system laid the foundation for legal systems throughout the Western world. Roman law was based on principles of justice and equity, and it became the foundation of modern legal systems. The Corpus Juris Civilis, compiled by Emperor Justinian in the 6th century, remains one of the most important legal texts in history. The influence of Roman law is immense. Many legal concepts we take for granted today, such as contracts, mortgages, and inheritance, have their roots in Roman legislation. The Roman postal service. Ancient Rome was a pioneer in creating an efficient postal system to facilitate the administration of its vast empire. This system, known as the cursus publicus, was established by Emperor Augustus. The Roman postal service utilized a network of couriers and horse-drawn chariots to transport official messages throughout the empire. This service was primarily reserved for governmental communications and state officials, but it was later expanded to allow ordinary citizens to send letters, albeit at an additional cost. Rest stops, or post stations, known as mansiones, were located along the main routes, allowing messengers to rest and change horses to ensure the speed of deliveries. The Roman army. Strength and discipline. The Roman army was one of the most advanced and feared military forces in the ancient world. The Roman legion was a highly organized military unit that could move quickly and maintain a coherent strategy, even on the most chaotic battlefields. Roman soldiers, called legionaries, were not only trained in combat, but also in tactical maneuvers, fortification construction, and the use of sophisticated weapons such as short swords, gladius, and pilum, javelins. Additionally, the Romans were pioneers in fortification systems, rapidly and efficiently constructing camps during their campaigns. Each legion consisted of 5,000 well-trained men, plus non-citizen auxiliaries who assisted in battle. The Roman army was also crucial to the expansion of the empire, allowing Rome to conquer vast territories across Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. Gladiators, fighting for survival. Gladiators were trained fighters who battled in arenas before thousands of spectators as part of public spectacles. Although many gladiators were slaves or prisoners of war, there were also volunteers who enlisted in gladiator schools known as ludi. These gladiators earned fame and money, but the risk of dying in the arena was extremely high. The Colosseum in Rome, the most famous arena of all, had a capacity to hold up to 70,000 spectators, and its battles included not only duels between men, but also fights against wild animals such as lions, tigers, and bears. The fights were often to the death, although occasionally gladiators who showed bravery or skill were offered the chance to be spared. These combat events were designed to satisfy the Roman public's thirst for violence, which they saw as both entertainment and a demonstration of Rome's military power. Roman polytheism. Before the conversion to Christianity, the Romans followed a polytheistic religion, worshipping a large number of gods and goddesses. Among the most important were Jupiter, the chief god, equivalent to Zeus in Greek mythology, Mars, the god of war, Venus, the goddess of love and beauty, and Neptune, the god of the sea. The Romans believed that the well-being of the empire depended on the benevolence of these gods, and therefore they performed rituals and sacrifices in their honor. Temples were dedicated to each deity, and religious festivals and celebrations were held throughout the year. Additionally, the imperial cult promoted the worship of emperors as divinities, especially after their death. At certain times, some emperors were even deified, such as Augustus, who was worshipped as a god. Persecution of Christians. During the first 3 centuries of the Christian era, Christians in the Roman Empire were brutally persecuted, especially during the reigns of emperors like Nero and Domitian. The most cruel persecution occurred during the reign of Diocletian, 284–305 AD, when Christians were accused of treason and subversion for refusing to worship the Roman gods. They were forced to worship Jupiter and the emperor, and those who refused were condemned to die in the arena as public spectacle, being devoured by beasts or burned alive. Christianity was seen as a threat to Roman order because of its rejection of idol worship and the imperial cult. However, with Constantine's conversion in the 4th century and the Edict of Milan in 313 AD, Christianity shifted from being persecuted to becoming the official religion of the Roman Empire. The first sack of Rome. The first significant sack of Rome occurred in 387 BC at the hands of the Gallic tribe of the Senones, who defeated the Roman army at the Battle of the Allia. After the defeat, the Gauls plundered and sacked the city, taking whatever they could. This attack was a shock to the Romans, who had never imagined their city could be invaded in such a manner. The Vestal Virgin, in charge of maintaining the sacred fire of Vesta, fled with her companions to prevent the Gauls from profaning the temple. This sack was so devastating that the Romans were forced to negotiate with the Gauls to get them to leave the city. The sack marked a turning point in Rome's history, as the city had to rebuild and reinforce its defenses. The first Roman invasion of Britain. The first Roman attempt to invade Britain was in 55 BC, under the command of Julius Caesar. Although the Roman general failed in his initial attempt, he showed the Romans that not only did Britain exist, but it could also be conquered. After his failed attempt, the Romans did not return until 43 AD, when Emperor Claudius successfully completed the invasion, establishing the Roman province of Britannia. The Roman invasion completely transformed the island, introducing new technologies, infrastructure and laws, resulting in the Romanization of Britain. Despite native uprisings like the famous Boudica rebellion, the Romans managed to maintain control of the island until the 5th century. They ate lying down. The habit of eating while lying down was common among the Roman elite. The upper-class Romans adopted this practice from the Greeks, who reclined during their banquets as a sign of social distinction. High-ranking men would lie on sofas or couches, while women and children ate sitting. During banquets, hosts invited their friends and family to feasts that could last for hours. Romans indulged in gastronomic excess, eating large amounts of food, and sometimes inducing vomiting in order to continue eating. These banquets were not only for nourishment, but also served as social events, opportunities to conduct business, and reinforce political alliances. Favorite pets. Although dogs and cats were popular in ancient Rome, Romans also had exotic pets like ferrets, monkeys, and birds. Ferrets were particularly valued for their ability to catch mice and control pests, especially in homes. Emperor Caesar Augustus even sent ferrets to the Balearic Islands to control a rabbit infestation. Romans were also fond of monkeys and exotic birds, which were symbols of status and wealth. Imperial nymphomania, Messalina. One of the most scandalous figures in the Roman court was Messalina, wife of Emperor Claudius. She was noted not only for her beauty, but also for her rampant sexual activity. Pliny the Elder recorded that Messalina boasted of having surpassed prostitutes in terms of the number of men she could satisfy in a single night. In one particularly scandalous episode, she organized a competition among the most famous prostitutes in Rome to see who could satisfy more men in a single night. This obsession with sex and infidelities made her famous in the Roman court, and she was eventually executed by Claudius after being discovered conspiring against him. Vulgar poem. Catullus Catullus, one of the most famous poets of ancient Rome, is known not only for his romantic and lyrical poetry, but also for his vulgar and provocative writings. In his verses, he did not shy away from discussing topics like sexual passion or personal intrigues. One of the most controversial episodes of his life was when he wrote poems full of insults and vulgarities aimed at his enemies. In particular, he directed very offensive verses at two of his critics, Furio and Aurelio, insulting them so explicitly that these poems were not translated into common Latin until the 20th century. Like many Roman poets, Catullus used poetry as a vehicle to express his disdain for social norms and to deliver a sharp critique of the authority figures of his time. Hair dyes. In ancient Rome, beauty and personal appearance were of great importance, especially among women of the upper class. Roman women often dyed their hair, particularly for special occasions or parties. The most popular shades were red and blonde, and to achieve these colors, they used a variety of natural ingredients such as wood ashes, goat fat, saffron, bleach, egg yolk, and henna plants. The process of dyeing hair in ancient Rome was not only for aesthetic purposes, but also reflected social status, as wealthy women could afford these treatments while the lower classes used more basic dyes. These dyes, which were even used to give a golden yellow color to women's hair, are similar to those used in paella and other traditional Mediterranean dishes. Terrifying method of cleaning the bottom. One of the most disgusting aspects of daily life in ancient Rome was the way Romans cleaned themselves after using the bathroom. Instead of using toilet paper as we do today, Romans employed a stick with a sponge attached to the end. This sponge was dipped in a container with salty water or vinegar to be used by the next person. This method was employed in public baths, where Romans would gather to socialize and relieve themselves. While it may sound horrific and repulsive to us, the Romans did not view hygiene the same way we do today. This system was undoubtedly an example of how a civilization advanced in many areas, but at the same time, maintained practices that today seem absolutely disgusting. The fall of the Western Empire. The collapse of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD is one of the most iconic events in European history. However, many people believe that Rome fell suddenly and catastrophically, but in reality, it was a long and gradual process. In the centuries leading up to its fall, Rome faced external pressures from barbarian peoples such as the Visigoths, Vandals, and Huns, who invaded various regions of the empire. Additionally, there was internal decay due to corruption in the government, economic weakness, and social tensions. In 476 AD, the last Roman emperor of the West, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by the Germanic leader Odoacer, marking the end of the Western Roman Empire. However, the Eastern Roman Empire, known as the Byzantine Empire, continued to exist for nearly 1,000 years more until the fall of Constantinople in 1453. The Roman Empire, the most influential empire. At its peak, around 117 AD, the Roman Empire became the largest and most powerful empire of the ancient world, spanning over 5 million square kilometers and with a population close to 80 million people. This empire stretched from the British Isles to Egypt and from Hispania to the Far East. The Roman Empire had a lasting influence on politics, culture, architecture, and law throughout the Western world. Despite its disintegration in the 5th century, the Roman legacy still lives on in Romance languages such as Spanish, Italian, French, and Portuguese, and in the legal foundations of many countries. Additionally, Roman roads and aqueducts are examples of their incredible engineering, and their system of government has been studied and adopted in many parts of the world. Rome was not only a military superpower, but also played a key role in the spread of Christianity and the formation of the foundations of modern Western civilization. Ancient Rome is one of the most fascinating and complex civilizations in history. With its achievements in architecture, law, technology, and culture, it left a legacy that still resonates in the modern world. However, we must not forget that it also had darker sides, such as the cruelty of its spectacles, hygiene practices, and the treatment of certain social groups. Through these stories and curiosities, we have been able to see the complexity of this society, which often mixed greatness with the macabre and the surprising. If any of these curiosities about ancient Rome surprised you, we invite you to leave a comment below and share this video with your friends so they can also discover the amazing legacy of Rome. And if you want to know more fascinating stories about the past, subscribe and activate the notifications to stay updated on our upcoming videos. See you in the next exploration of history.